The automated payment left Leo's account on the 3rd of every month. It happened without ceremony. A silent electronic transfer that moved exactly 40% of his paycheck into a separate account he had labeled Family Relief years ago, when he was still young enough to believe that love was something you proved by how much of yourself you gave away. The money sat there for a day, sometimes two, while his algorithms scanned his parents' credit card balances, their mortgage statements, the quiet accumulation of debt they never seemed to notice they were accruing. Then, with the same silent efficiency, the payments went out, the balances dropped to zero. The statements arrived in his parents' mailbox showing no trace of the intervention that had saved them. Leo had designed the system himself. He was good at systems. He had built his career in finance on the understanding that money was not just currency, but narrative. A story you told about who you were and what you valued. Parents' story, as they told it to their friends and neighbors, was one of savvy and good fortune. "We've just been so blessed," his mother would say, gesturing around the beautiful suburban home with its updated kitchen and its professionally landscaped garden. "Richard has such a good head for investments, and we've always lived within our means." They had no idea that their means had been quietly, systematically supplemented by their son for 7 years. Leo sat in his one-bedroom apartment, the same apartment he had rented since graduating from college, with its narrow kitchen and its single window that looked out onto a brick wall, and reviewed the monthly transfer on his laptop. The numbers glowed in the dim light. $4,827, exactly 40% of his post-tax income. It was more than his rent, more than he spent on groceries, utilities, and every other expense combined. It was the price of being the invisible son, the one who had stayed behind while his parents lived the life they believed they had earned. He clicked the button to authorize the payments. The screen flickered, and a confirmation message appeared. "Transfers complete. All balances zero." Leo closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of his apartment. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's television murmured through the thin wall. Outside, the city glittered, indifferent to the small, quiet sacrifices of a man who had learned, long ago, that his worth was measured in what he could provide. The arrangement had begun 7 years ago, almost by accident. Leo had just started his job at Meridian Capital, a mid-sized investment firm where his talent for numbers and his quiet, unassuming demeanor had quickly made him indispensable. He was earning more money than he had ever imagined. Not wealth, exactly, but a solid, comfortable salary that should have allowed him to save for a down payment, to travel, to build a life of his own. He had been 26 then, still young enough to believe that his success was something to share. His mother had called one evening, her voice tight with the particular strain she used when discussing money. "It's just been such a difficult few months, Leo. Your father's business has been slow, and the credit card bills are piling up. We'll manage, of course. We always do. But I worry. You know how I worry." Leo had listened. He had always been good at listening. And when he hung up, he had opened his banking app and transferred $2,000 to their account. Just once, he told himself, just to help them through a rough patch. The rough patch never ended. A month later, another call, another transfer. Then the calls became texts, casual mentions of tight months and unexpected expenses. Leo began to notice patterns, the way his mother's voice would brighten after a transfer cleared, the way his father would mention in passing the new golf clubs he had purchased or the weekend trip they had taken to the coast. They never explicitly asked for money. They didn't have to. They had trained Leo over a lifetime to anticipate their needs before they spoke them. So he built the system, the automated transfers, the algorithm that scanned their accounts and paid their balances without their knowledge. He told himself it was easier this way, cleaner, more efficient. He told himself that he was helping, that this was what family did, that his parents deserved to enjoy their retirement without the burden of debt. He told himself many things over the years to justify the slow erosion of his own future. The apartment was a compromise Leo had made with himself early on. He could have afforded something larger, a 2-bedroom perhaps, in a neighborhood with trees and natural light. But every dollar he spent on himself was a dollar that couldn't go into the family relief account. And the family relief account had become, over time, the central organizing principle of his life. He tracked his expenses with the same meticulous care he brought to his work, trimming every excess, denying every impulse. He brought his lunch to the office in a brown paper bag, while his colleagues ordered sushi and artisanal salads. He wore the same coats, the same shoes, year after year, until they were threadbare and embarrassing. He dated sparingly and never seriously because serious relationships required explanation, and he had no idea how to explain the invisible weight he carried. Once, a woman he had been seeing, her name was Julia, and she had kind eyes and a laugh that made him feel, for fleeting moments, like a different person, had asked him why he lived the way he did. "You make good money, Leo. I've seen your title. I know what people in your position earn. Why do you live like a grad student?" He had deflected, made a joke about simple tastes and frugal habits. She had looked at him for a long moment, her kind eyes seeing more than he wanted her to see, and then she had let it go. They stopped seeing each other not long after. Leo told himself it was for the best. Relationships were complicated. Money was simple. Money was just numbers, moving from one account to another, asking nothing of him but discipline. The truth was simpler and more painful. He had been trained since childhood to believe that his needs came last. His parents had never said this explicitly. They had simply lived it, prioritizing their own comforts, their own desires, their own carefully curated image of success, while Leo learned to be small, to be quiet, to be grateful for whatever was left over. He had carried that training into adulthood, and it had shaped him into a man who could earn 6 figures and still feel guilty about buying a new winter coat. The calls from his mother continued over the years, but they changed in texture. At first, she had been anxious, apologetic. "I hate to ask, Leo, but..." Then, as the system smoothed away the friction of their financial struggles, her tone shifted. She became brighter, more confident. She talked about their good fortune and their smart choices. She posted photos on social media, the new patio furniture, the cruise to Alaska, the kitchen renovation with its gleaming granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. "So blessed," the captions read. "Hard work pays off." Leo liked every post. He never commented. His father, too, seemed transformed by the invisible safety net Leo had woven beneath them. Richard had always been a man of grand gestures and uncertain follow-through, a series of business ventures that had flickered and failed, leaving behind a trail of debt that Leo had quietly absorbed. But now, freed from the consequences of his own choices, Richard had become expansive, generous in the way of people who believed their prosperity was earned. He bought rounds of drinks for friends, he tipped extravagantly, he talked about the value of a dollar, as if he had ever truly learned it. Neither of them asked where the money was coming from. They didn't want to know. The system Leo had built was designed to be invisible, and they accepted that invisibility as naturally as they accepted the sunrise. Their good fortune was, in their minds, simply what they deserved. And Leo, sitting in his one-bedroom apartment with its single window and its view of a brick wall, let them believe it. Breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon, 7 years after the first transfer. Leo was at his desk, reviewing a client's portfolio, when his phone buzzed with a text from his mother. It was a photo, his parents, beaming, standing in front of a sleek white Lexus SUV, a giant red bow perched on the hood. The caption read, "Upgrade, so grateful for all our blessings. Hard work and smart choices really do pay off." Leo stared at the photo. The Lexus SUV was a $70,000 vehicle. He knew because he had looked it up, his fingers moving automatically, his mind already calculating. $70,000. It was more than he had spent on himself in the past 3 years combined. It was more than the down payment he had been quietly saving for, before he realized that every spare dollar would be needed to keep his parents' lives afloat. He closed the photo and set down his phone. He finished his work for the day. He was always professional, always precise. And then he walked home to his apartment. He sat in the darkness, the refrigerator humming, the neighbor's television murmuring through the wall, and he thought about the 7 years he had given away. 40% of every paycheck, the vacations he hadn't taken, the relationships he hadn't pursued, the life he hadn't built because he had been too busy building a safety net for people who didn't even know they were falling. He thought about the Lexus SUV, gleaming and new, purchased with money that had come indirectly from his own denied desires. He thought about his mother's caption, "Hard work and smart choices." Whose hard work? Whose smart choices? And for the first time in 7 years, Leo allowed himself to feel the full weight of his own anger. He opened his laptop, he navigated to the family relief account, the one he had built and maintained with such careful, loving precision. He looked at the numbers, the total amount transferred over 7 years, calculated automatically by his own algorithm, $387,416.52. He stared at the number for a long time. It was a house. It was a future. It was 7 years of his life, reduced to digits on a screen. He closed the laptop. He didn't stop the transfers, not yet. He needed to think. He needed to plan. He needed to decide what he wanted, for the first time in his adult life, without the filter of his parents' needs. But something had shifted. A gear had clicked into place. A lock had turned. Leo had spent 7 years being invisible. It was time to be seen. The decision to stop the payments came on a Sunday morning, in the quiet of his apartment, with a cup of coffee cooling in his hands and the weight of 7 years pressing against his chest. Leo had met someone. Her name was Camille, and she was nothing like the women he had dated before. The ones he had kept at arm's length, the ones who had eventually drifted away because he couldn't explain why he lived like a man half his income. Camille was a landscape architect, a woman who spent her days designing gardens and green spaces, who understood that beautiful things took time and patience and care. She had kind eyes and a laugh that made him feel, for the first time in years, that he might be more than the sum of his sacrifices. She didn't know about the family relief account. She didn't know that he had spent 7 years quietly dismantling his own future to prop up his parents' illusions. She only knew that he was kind and careful, and that he seemed to carry a weight he never spoke about. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to build a life with her, a real life, with a home and a garden, and the kind of future that required more than a one-bedroom apartment and a view of a brick wall. To do that, he needed to stop. He needed to reclaim the 40% of his income that had been flowing, silently and steadily, into the bottomless vessel of his parents' expectations. He opened his laptop and navigated to the family relief account. The dashboard glowed in the dim morning light, the balance, the payment history, the automated rules he had written years ago and never revisited. His cursor hovered over the button that said, Disable Automated Payments. He thought about his mother's face in the photo with the Lexus SUV, beaming with a gratitude she had never directed at him. He thought about his father's expansive gestures, the rounds of drinks, the lavish tips, the performance of prosperity that Leo had funded with his own denied desires. He thought about the 7 years of his life he had given away, and the future he wanted to claim. He clicked the button. A confirmation message appeared. Automated payments disabled. No further transfers will be processed. Leo closed the laptop. He finished his coffee. He went to meet Camille for a walk in the park, and he didn't think about his parents for the rest of the day. The first month passed without incident. Leo had expected a call, a text, some acknowledgement that the invisible safety net had vanished. But his parents said nothing. Their social media posts continued. A weekend trip to the wine country, a new set of patio furniture, a dinner at a restaurant with a Michelin star. They were still spending. They just hadn't noticed, yet, that the balances weren't returning to zero. The second month, the cracks began to show. His mother called on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with a familiar strain. Leo, sweetheart, I don't know what's happening, but the credit card company is saying we have an outstanding balance. A large one. It must be some kind of error. Your father's going to call them tomorrow, but I wanted to let you know, in case you had any ideas. Leo stood in his kitchen, the phone pressed to his ear, and felt the old, familiar pull. The instinct to reassure, to fix, to make the problem disappear. He had been trained for this his entire life, but he had also, over the past month, begun to taste what freedom felt like. He had started a savings account for the down payment. He had told Camille about the apartment he dreamed of, a small house maybe, with a yard where she could design a garden. She had smiled and said she would fill it with lavender and rosemary and a single lemon tree. He wanted that life. He wanted it more than he had ever wanted to be invisible. I'm sure you'll figure it out, Mom, he said. His voice was steady. You and Dad have always been so good with money. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a small, startled silence, as if his mother had expected a different response and wasn't sure how to proceed. Well, yes, of course. We'll get it sorted. I just thought, well, never mind. I'll let you know how it goes. She hung up. Leo set down his phone and looked out the window at the brick wall. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He had done it. He had said no. Or at least, he had said, not my problem. It felt like the first breath of air after years of drowning. The family intervention came on a Saturday, 3 weeks later. Leo had been summoned by a text from his father, a terse, uncharacteristic message that read simply, We need to talk. Come to the house, 2 p.m. No emojis, no warmth, just the cold, imperious command of a man who believed his son's time belonged to him. Leo drove to the suburban house with its updated kitchen and its professionally landscaped garden and its gleaming white Lexus SUV parked in the driveway. He sat in his modest sedan for a long moment, looking at the life his parents had built on the foundation of his invisible labor. The roses his mother had planted along the front walk were blooming, soft pink and fragrant. The lawn was immaculate, a carpet of green that spoke of paid gardeners and careful maintenance. It was a beautiful house. It was a lie. He walked to the front door and rang the bell. His mother answered. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. She didn't hug him. She simply stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. Your father's in the living room. We need to have a serious conversation, Leo, about the family. The family. The word had always been a weapon in this house, a way of asking Leo to carry more than his share, to sacrifice more than was reasonable, to disappear into the needs of others. He had heard it his entire life. For the family, Leo. It's what's best for the family. You don't want to let the family down. He walked into the living room. His father was seated in his usual armchair, a large, leather thing that had cost more than Leo's monthly rent. His face was red, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the armrest as if he were restraining himself from something more violent. On the coffee table before him lay a stack of papers, credit card statements, bank notices, the quiet evidence of a lifestyle that had finally caught up with its own lies. Sit down. Richard's voice was cold. Leo sat. He folded his hands in his lap and waited. His father leaned forward, his eyes hard. Your mother and I have been reviewing our finances. Something has changed. For years, we had a cushion, a sense of security. And then 2 months ago, it disappeared. Our balances stopped being paid. Our debts started accumulating. And now we're facing the possibility of losing everything. The house, the cars, the life we've built. He slammed his hand on the coffee table. The stack of papers jumped. Leo didn't flinch. I don't know what you did or how you did it, Richard continued, his voice rising. But I know you're involved. You've always been good with numbers. You've always had access to our accounts. And now, suddenly, the money is gone. You've been stingy, Leo. You've forgotten where you came from. You've forgotten what family means. His mother began to cry, soft, hiccuping sobs that filled the silence. We're not asking for much, sweetheart. We just need help getting through this rough patch. We need to maintain the family dignity. People are starting to talk. The neighbors, our friends, they're noticing that things are different. We can't lose this house. We can't lose everything we've worked for. Everything we've worked for. Leo looked at his mother, at the woman who had posted glowing tributes to her own smart choices while he lived in a one-bedroom apartment and denied himself every comfort. At the woman who had never once asked him about his life, his dreams, his future. The woman who was now crying, not because she understood what she had taken from him, but because the taking had stopped. He looked at his father, at the man who had slammed his hand on the table and called him stingy, at the man who had spent 7 years believing his prosperity was earned, while his son quietly dismantled his own future to make it possible, at the man who had never once thanked him, because he had never once known there was anything to thank. "You're right," Leo said quietly. "Something did change. 2 months ago, I stopped paying your bills." The silence that followed was immense. His mother's sobs faltered. His father's face went from red to white, the color draining away like water from a broken vessel. "What?" "For 7 years," Leo said, his voice steady, "I've been diverting 40% of my income into a separate account. I built an automated system that paid off your credit cards, your mortgage, your car loans. Every month, without fail, I cleared your balances. You never knew because I designed it to be invisible. You thought your good fortune was your own doing. You thought you were savvy, blessed, smart. You were just spending my money." His mother's hand flew to her mouth. His father stared at him, his jaw slack. "I lived in a one-bedroom apartment with a view of a brick wall," Leo continued. "I wore the same coat for 6 years. I brought my lunch to work in a brown paper bag while my colleagues ordered sushi. I didn't travel. I didn't save for a home. I didn't build a life. I built yours. And you never noticed. You never asked. You never thanked me. You just kept spending and posting and believing that your prosperity was something you had earned." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and set it on the coffee table beside the stack of statements. "This is the total amount I transferred into your lives over 7 years, he said. $387,416.52. It's more than I've spent on myself in my entire adult life. It's a down payment on a house. It's a future. It's 7 years of my existence, reduced to a number." His mother was weeping now, ugly, wrenching sobs that shook her entire frame. His father was staring at the paper, his face a mask of shock, and something that might have been the first stirrings of shame. "Leo," his mother gasped, "we didn't know. We didn't realize. We thought—" "You thought you were lucky." Leo's voice was quiet, final. "You thought the universe was rewarding you for your hard work and smart choices. You never thought to ask if someone else was paying the price." He stood up. The chair scraped softly against the floor. "I've met someone," he said. "Her name is Camille. I want to marry her. I want to buy a house with a yard where she can plant a garden. I want to build a life that's mine. And I can't do that if I'm still building yours." He walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "I'm not going to pay your bills anymore. I'm not going to be invisible anymore. You're adults. You've had 7 years of my life. Figure out the rest on your own." He walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. In the driveway, he stood for a long moment, breathing. The roses his mother had planted were still blooming, soft pink, fragrant, beautiful. He had paid for them indirectly with years of his own denied desires. He looked at them, and for the first time he felt no resentment, just a quiet, profound release. He got into his car and drove away. The hour that followed was the longest of Leo's life. He had not left. He had stood at the door, his hand on the knob, and his mother's voice had stopped him, not with kindness, but with the particular weapon she had wielded his entire life: guilt. "Please, Leo, don't walk out. Not like this. We're your parents. We deserve at least the chance to be heard." He had turned back, not because he believed anything would change, but because some part of him, the part that had been trained since childhood to put their needs before his own, couldn't quite sever the cord. Not yet. So he had returned to the living room, sat back down in the chair across from his father's leather armchair, and listened. For an hour, they berated him. His father paced the room, his voice rising and falling in waves of indignation. "Do you have any idea what it's like to build something from nothing? To raise a family? To give your children every opportunity, only to have them turn their backs when you need them most? Your sister calls every day, Leo. Every single day. She asks how we're doing. She cares. When was the last time you called just to see if we were okay?" Leo didn't answer. He knew the truth, that his sister Lila called because she wanted something. She wanted validation, attention, the steady stream of parental approval that had always flowed more freely to her than to him. She called, but she had never once contributed a dollar to the household. She had never once asked if her parents needed help. She had simply performed the role of the devoted daughter, and they had accepted the performance as reality. His mother, still weeping, picked up the thread. "We sacrificed everything for you, Leo. Everything. The private schools, the tutoring, the music lessons you wanted to take. We went without so you could have the best. And now, when we're facing the hardest time of our lives, you tell us you've been paying our bills in secret, and then you just stop? Without warning? Without discussion? How is that fair?" Fair. The word hung in the air, heavy and wrong. Leo thought about the private schools. He had been sent to them not because he wanted to go, but because his parents wanted the status. He had been the quiet, studious child, the one who earned scholarships and awards, the one whose achievements his parents displayed like trophies, while never once asking if he was happy. The music lessons had been his mother's idea. She had dreamed of being a pianist in her youth, and she had projected that dream onto him until he had finally quietly stopped practicing. He thought about the sacrifices they claimed to have made, the vacations they had taken without him, the new cars they had leased while he wore hand-me-down clothes. The way they had always prioritized their own comfort, their own image, their own carefully curated performance of success, while Leo learned to be small, to be quiet, to be grateful for whatever was left over. And now they were calling him selfish. His mother leaned forward, her eyes red and swollen, her voice cracking with manufactured vulnerability. After everything we sacrificed for you, Leo, after everything we gave up, can't even spare a few $1,000s to help us out, just to get us through this rough patch? We're not asking for much, just enough to keep the house. Just enough to maintain our dignity. Our dignity. Leo felt something shift inside him. Not break. Something had broken long ago, and he had simply learned to live around the sharp edges. This was different. This was a gear clicking into place, a lock finally turning after years of being jammed. This was the moment he stopped being the invisible son and became something else entirely. He didn't yell. He didn't slam his hand on the table. He simply reached into his bag, the same worn leather messenger bag he had carried for years, and withdrew his laptop. He set it on the coffee table, beside the stack of credit card statements and the folded paper with the total sum of his 7 years of sacrifice. He opened it and logged into his personal accounting software. His mother's sobs faltered. "What are you doing?" Leo didn't answer. He navigated to the file he had built over the past few weeks, the one he had been quietly assembling late at night in the darkness of his one-bedroom apartment. It was a complete accounting of every dollar he had ever spent on his parents. Not just the 7 years of automated payments, but everything. The small transfers before the system existed, the emergency loans they had never repaid, the car repair he had covered when his father's business was slow, the medical bill he had paid when his mother needed a procedure and their insurance had fallen short. He had documented it all. Every check, every transfer, every quiet and visible act of love that had been erased from their memory the moment it was received. He turned the laptop so they could see the screen. "This," he said, his voice calm and steady, "is what I've given you. Not just the $387,000 from the past 7 years, everything. Every dollar I've spent keeping your lives afloat while you posted photos of your blessings and your smart choices. Every vacation you took, every renovation you made, every meal you ate at restaurants where the bill was more than my monthly grocery budget. All of it. Paid for by me." His mother stared at the screen. His father's face had gone pale, his earlier bluster draining away like water from a broken vessel. The numbers glowed in the dim light of the living room, line after line, date after date, a lifetime of invisible sacrifice reduced to digits. "You said you sacrificed everything for me," Leo continued. "You said you went without so I could have the best. But that's not true. You never went without. You just spent what I gave you and called it your own. You never sacrificed anything. I did. I sacrificed my 20s. I sacrificed my future. I sacrificed the chance to build a life of my own because I was too busy building yours." He scrolled down, revealing the final total. $512,743.28. "That's the number," Leo said quietly. $500,000. More than most people earn in a decade. I gave it to you without asking for anything in return, and you never once thanked me. You never once asked if I was okay. You just kept spending and posting and believing that your prosperity was something you had earned." His mother's tears had stopped. She was staring at the screen, her face a mask of shock and something that might have been the first stirrings of genuine shame. His father had sunk back into his leather armchair, his hands limp at his sides, his eyes fixed on the numbers that exposed the lie of his entire existence. "Your sister calls every day," Leo said. "You're right, she does, but she's never given you a dollar. She's never asked if you needed help. She performs the role of the devoted daughter, and you accept the performance because it's easier than seeing the truth. Truth is that I've been the one keeping this family alive. Not Lila, not you, me. And I'm done." He closed the laptop and stood up. "You wanted to know why I stopped the payments. This is why. I met someone. Her name is Camille. I want to marry her. I want to buy a house with a yard. I want to build a life that's mine. And I can't do that if I'm still pouring $500,000 into a bottomless pit of your expectations." He picked up his bag and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "I'm not going to pay your bills anymore. I'm not going to be invisible anymore. You're adults. You've had 20 years of my life. Figure out the rest on your own." His mother's voice, thin and desperate, followed him. "Leo, please. We're your parents. We love you. We didn't realize—" "You didn't ask." Leo's voice was quiet, final. "You never asked, and that's the problem. You never asked because you didn't want to know. You wanted the money without the guilt. You wanted the safety net without the acknowledgement. You wanted me to be invisible, and I let you. But I'm done letting you." He walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. In the driveway, the roses were still blooming, soft pink, fragrant, beautiful. Leo stood among them for a long moment, breathing. The evening air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of flowers and freshly cut grass. The Lexus SUV gleamed in the fading light, a monument to everything he had given and everything his parents had taken without acknowledgement. He thought about Camille, about her kind eyes and her laugh and the way she talked about gardens, about lavender and rosemary and a single lemon tree heavy with fruit. He thought about the house he wanted to build with her, the life he wanted to create. He thought about the future that was finally, for the first time, his. He got into his car and drove away. Behind him, the house on the quiet suburban street glowed with warm light, the same light it had always glowed with. But something had changed. The invisible safety net had been withdrawn. The foundation had crumbled. And Leo, the son who had been erased for so long, had finally written himself back into existence. He didn't know what would happen to his parents. He didn't know if they would lose the house, the cars, the carefully curated image they had built on his labor. He didn't know if they would finally, truly see him for what he had given. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was free. The certified envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a courier who required a signature. Richard Vance signed the electronic pad with a flourish, assuming it was another legal notice from one of the creditors who had begun circling in the weeks since the invisible safety net had vanished. He carried the envelope into the kitchen, where his wife was sitting at the granite island, her coffee growing cold, her eyes fixed on nothing. "What is it?" she asked, her voice thin and tired. The past month had aged her. The sleepless nights, the collection calls, the slow, grinding realization that the life they had built was a house of cards, and the wind had finally begun to blow. Richard tore open the envelope. Inside was not a bill from a creditor. It was a thick stack of paper, neatly bound, with a cover page that read simply, "Ledger of Payments, Family Relief Account." Beneath the title in smaller type, "Itemized record of all financial support provided by Leo Vance to Richard and Margaret Vance, 7-year period." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Richard's face went pale. They sat down at the kitchen island side by side and began to read. The ledger was 30 pages long. Leo had compiled it with the same meticulous precision he brought to his work at Meridian Capital. Every transaction dated, categorized, and annotated. It began 7 years ago with a modest transfer of $2,000 labeled Emergency, Credit Card Overdraft. It continued, month after month, year after year, a quiet, relentless chronicle of his parents' spending and his own silent absorption of their choices. Page 1 to 3, mortgage payments. The house on the quiet suburban street with its updated kitchen and professionally landscaped garden. Leo had paid the mortgage for 18 months during what his parents called a tight period. The payments totaled $43,200. They had never asked where the money came from. They had simply assumed their luck had turned. Page 4 to 7, credit card balances. The Visa, the MasterCard, the American Express. Month after month, the balances climbed. Restaurants, vacations, home decor, the small, endless indulgences of people who believed their prosperity was earned. And month after month, Leo's automated system cleared them to zero. Total, $87,450. Page 8 to 12. The kitchen renovation. Margaret had posted photos of the gleaming granite countertops, the stainless steel appliances, the soft closed cabinets. "So blessed," the caption had read. "Hard work pays off." Leo had paid the contractors' invoices directly, routing them through a separate account so his parents would never see the source. Total, $52,800. Page 13 to 15. The cruise to Alaska. Richard and Margaret beaming on the deck of a ship, glaciers glowing in the background. "Trip of a lifetime," the Facebook post had declared. Leo had paid for the cruise, the excursions, the first-class airfare. He had eaten ramen noodles in his one-bedroom apartment while his parents dined on lobster and champagne. Total, $18,300. Page 16 to 20. The Lexus SUV. The gleaming white vehicle with a giant red bow. Upgrade! So grateful for all our blessings. Leo had not paid for the car directly, but he had paid off the credit card balances that made the down payment possible. He had absorbed the cost of their indulgence so they could believe it was their own. Total attributed, $22,000. Page 21 to 25, miscellaneous. The emergency room visit when Richard's insurance fell short, the new roof after a storm, the small loans that were never repaid, the countless invisible acts of love that his parents had accepted as naturally as breathing, never once asking who was making them possible. Total, $118,250. The final page showed the grand total, bolded and underlined, $342,000. Attached to the back of the ledger was a short note, handwritten in Leo's precise, careful script. "Mom and Dad, I didn't sacrifice my 20s so you could live a lie. I didn't wear the same coat for 6 years, skip vacations, and delay every dream I ever had so you could post photos of your blessings and pretend your prosperity was earned. I gave you everything I had, and you never once asked if I was okay. You never once thanked me. You just kept spending and posting and believing that your good fortune was something you deserved. It wasn't. It was me. Consider this bill a thank you for the selfishness I finally embraced. I'm moving on. I'm building a life of my own, a life with a woman I love, a home with a garden, a future that belongs to me. I suggest you find a way to pay for yourselves. I don't expect you to repay this money. I don't want it back. What I want is something you've never been able to give me. Acknowledgement. The understanding that I was there, that I carried you, that I gave up my own future so you could pretend yours was secure. You called me selfish for finally stopping. But the truth is, I was never selfish enough. I should have stopped years ago. I should have let you face the consequences of your own choices. I should have built my own life instead of propping up yours. I'm doing that now. I won't be calling. I won't be visiting. I need time, maybe a long time, to figure out who I am without the weight of your expectations. I hope you use that time to figure out who you are without the safety net I provided. I love you. I think I always will. But love isn't supposed to feel like drowning. And I'm finally choosing to breathe. Leo. The kitchen was silent. Margaret's hands trembled as she set down the note. Her face was wet with tears. Not the performative sobs she had deployed at the intervention, but something quieter, more genuine. The tears of a woman who had just been shown, in precise, itemized detail, the cost of her own obliviousness. Richard sat motionless, the ledger still open in front of him, his eyes fixed on the final total. $342,000. It was more than he had earned in the past 5 years combined. It was more than the house was worth. It was the price of his son's invisible love, and he had never once thought to ask who was paying it. He paid for the cruise, Margaret whispered. The kitchen, the mortgage, all of it. He paid for everything, and we never even thanked him. Richard said nothing. His jaw was tight, his eyes bright with something that might have been shame or might have been the first stirrings of understanding. He had spent his entire life believing that his prosperity was earned, that his success was his own, that his son's quiet, steady presence was simply what was expected. He had never imagined that Leo was the architect of everything he had taken for granted. And now the architect was gone. That evening, Leo sat on the small balcony of Camille's apartment, a modest space, but one that looked out over a community garden rather than a brick wall. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Camille was inside, making tea, her voice humming softly through the open door. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Leo, we got the ledger. We read the note. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to make this right. I didn't know. I didn't realize. I was so caught up in my own life that I never saw what you were giving up. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk? Please? He read the message twice. He thought about the 7 years of his life he had given away, the apartment with the brick wall, the coat he had worn until it was threadbare, the vacations he hadn't taken, the relationships he hadn't pursued, the future he had deferred while his parents lived the life they believed they deserved. He thought about the ledger, the 30 pages of itemized sacrifice, the $342,000 that represented not just money, but time, energy, love, all of it given freely and none of it ever seen. He typed a reply. I need time. I don't know how long. I need to build my own life now. I hope you understand. He sent it. Then he turned off his phone and set it aside. Camille stepped onto the balcony carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to him and sat down beside him, her shoulder brushing his. She didn't ask about the message. She didn't need to. She simply sat with him, watching the sky deepen into twilight, her presence a quiet, steady comfort. This is nice, Leo said after a long moment. This, you, the garden, the quiet. I didn't know it could feel like this. Camille smiled. Like what? Like enough. He took a sip of tea. Like I'm enough. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together in the fading light, the future stretching before them, uncertain, exhilarating, and entirely their own. Leo had spent 7 years being invisible. He had spent his entire life believing that his worth was measured in what he could provide. But sitting here, in the quiet of a life he was finally choosing, he understood something he had never allowed himself to believe. He had always been enough. He had simply been giving his enough to people who couldn't see it. Now he was keeping it for himself. The blocking of their numbers was not an act of anger. Leo had thought about it for days, turning the decision over in his mind like a smooth stone, feeling its weight and texture. He had imagined the moment, the finality of pressing that button, the silence that would follow. He had wondered if he would feel guilt, regret, the old familiar pull of obligation. He had wondered if he was strong enough to mean it. When the moment came, it was almost anticlimactic. He sat on the edge of his bed in the new apartment, a modest one-bedroom, but with a window that looked out onto a tree-lined street rather than a brick wall, and opened his phone. He navigated to his mother's contact. His finger hovered over the screen for a long moment. He thought about the ledger, the 30 pages, the $342,000, the 7 years of his life reduced to numbers on a page. He thought about the note he had sent, and the text his mother had sent in return. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk? He believed she was sorry. He believed in some fragile, uncertain way that she was beginning to understand the weight of what she had taken from him. But understanding was not the same as change. And change, if it came at all, would take time. Time that Leo could not give her while he was still tangled in the old patterns, still waiting for the phone to ring, still bracing himself for the next request, the next crisis, the next opportunity to disappear into their needs. He needed space. He needed silence. He needed to learn who he was without the weight of their expectations pressing against his chest. He pressed the button. Contact blocked. Then his father's number. Contact blocked. Then his sister's, just in case. Contact blocked. He set down the phone and looked out the window at the tree-lined street. The leaves were turning, gold and orange and deep burnished red. A child was riding a bicycle on the sidewalk, her laughter drifting up through the open window. The world was continuing on, ordinary and beautiful. indifferent to the small, quiet act of liberation that had just occurred. Leo sat in the silence of his new apartment and waited for the guilt to come. It didn't. The news came through the grapevine, as news of family often does. Leo had not cut himself off entirely from the world his parents inhabited. He still spoke occasionally to his Aunt Elaine, his mother's younger sister, a woman who had always treated him with a kindness that felt genuine, who had once pulled him aside at a holiday gathering and whispered, "You don't have to carry them, Leo. You know that, right? You don't have to carry anyone." He had nodded and smiled and pretended he understood. He hadn't understood, not then. Elaine called him on a Sunday afternoon, her voice careful, testing the waters. "I heard from your mother. She said you've stepped back. She said you sent them some kind of accounting." She was crying, Leo. I haven't heard her cry like that in years. Leo sat on his small balcony, the one that overlooked the community garden Camille had helped design, with its rows of lavender and rosemary and the single lemon tree she had planted in his honor. "I did. I sent them a record of everything I've paid for over the past 7 years. It was a lot, more than they realized." Elaine was silent for a moment. "I always wondered how they were managing. The trips, the renovations. Richard's business never seemed to do that well. But Margaret always acted like they were rolling in money. I thought maybe they'd inherited something or won the lottery. I never imagined that it was me." Leo's voice was calm, steady. "No one did. That was the point. I made myself invisible so they could believe their prosperity was earned. I thought I was helping. I thought I was being a good son. And now? Now I think I was enabling them. I was letting them live a lie. And I was paying for it with my own future. I stopped. They called me selfish. So I sent them the bill." Elaine let out a long, slow breath. "Good for you, Leo. Honestly, good for you. It's about time someone held them accountable." They talked for a while longer, about Elaine's garden, about Camille, about the small, ordinary details of a life that was finally beginning to feel like his own. And then, just before she hung up, Elaine said, almost as an afterthought, "They're selling the house, did you know? And the Lexus. They're downsizing to a small condo across town. Margaret told me they needed to simplify." I think she was embarrassed. Leo sat with the news for a long time after the call ended. The house on the quiet suburban street with its updated kitchen and professionally landscaped garden. The roses his mother had planted along the front walk, soft pink and fragrant. The Lexus SUV, gleaming white with its giant red bow. All of it gone, sold. Reduced to the practical reality of what his parents could actually afford, now that the invisible safety net had been withdrawn. He waited for the guilt to come, the old, familiar pull, the urge to call, to fix, to make it better. He waited for the voice in his head that sounded like his mother's, telling him he was selfish, ungrateful, forgetting where he came from. It didn't come. Instead, he felt something unexpected, relief. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a quiet, profound release. The weight he had carried for so long, the weight of their choices, their expectations, their carefully curated performance of success, had finally been set down, and it wasn't his to carry anymore. He looked out at the community garden, at the lavender and rosemary and the single lemon tree, its branches heavy with fruit. Camille had planted that tree for him because he had told her once, in a moment of unguarded honesty, that he had always wanted a garden but never believed he deserved one. "You deserve everything," she had said. "You just have to stop giving it all away." He was finally learning to believe her. The signing of the papers happened on a Tuesday afternoon in a small, sunny office at the title company. Leo sat at the conference table, a pen in his hand, surrounded by stacks of documents that represented the culmination of everything he had saved and sacrificed and finally claimed for himself. Camille sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee, her presence a quiet, steady comfort. The real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Patricia, walked him through each page with the patience of someone who understood that this moment was about more than money. "This is the big one," Patricia said, sliding the final document across the table. "Sign here, and the house is yours." Leo looked at the line. It was just a line, a blank space waiting for his name, but it felt like more. It felt like the threshold of a new life, a life he had built with his own hands, on his own terms, without the invisible weight of his parents' expectations pressing against his chest. He thought about the apartment with the brick wall, the coat he had worn until it was threadbare, the years he had spent believing that his worth was measured in what he could provide to others. He thought about the ledger, the 30 pages, the $342,000, the 7 years of his life he had given away. He thought about his parents, in their small condo across town, learning to live within the limits of their own choices. He didn't hate them. He didn't wish them ill. He simply understood now that he could not save people who did not want to be saved. He could not carry people who refused to walk on their own. He could only build his own life and let them build theirs. He signed his name, Leo Vance. Patricia smiled and slid the document back into the folder. "Congratulations, Mr. Vance. You're a homeowner." Camille squeezed his knee. "You did it," she said softly. "You really did it." Leo looked at her kind eyes and her warm smile, and the way she had believed in him, even when he hadn't believed in himself. "We did it," he said. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." She laughed, a soft musical sound. "You could have. You just needed someone to remind you that you were allowed to want things for yourself." He kissed her, there in the sunny office, with the stacks of papers and the cheerful real estate agent pretending not to watch. And when he pulled back, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. He felt free. The house was small but beautiful. It sat on a quiet street in a neighborhood full of old trees and friendly neighbors, with a yard that Camille had already begun to transform. She had planted lavender along the front walk, a nod to the roses his mother had grown, but different, new, hers. In the back, she had designed a garden with rosemary and sage and a single lemon tree, its branches young but promising. Leo stood in the backyard on the first evening after they moved in, the sky deepening into twilight, the scent of lavender drifting on the cool evening air. Camille was inside, unpacking boxes, her voice humming softly through the open window. The house glowed with warm light, a beacon of the life they were building together. He thought about his parents in their small condo across town. He thought about the ledger, still stored in a folder in his desk, not as a weapon, but as a reminder, a record of what he had given and what he had finally learned to keep for himself. He didn't know if he would ever speak to them again. He didn't know if they would ever truly understand what they had taken from him, or what he had chosen to reclaim. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was no longer responsible for their choices. He was only responsible for his own. He had spent 7 years paying off their debts in secret. He had spent his entire life believing that love was something you proved by how much of yourself you gave away. But love, real love, was not supposed to feel like drowning. It was supposed to feel like breathing. It was supposed to feel like this: a quiet evening, a garden full of lavender, a woman with kind eyes humming in the kitchen, a future that was finally, completely his own. Leo Vance, the invisible son, had written himself back into existence, and the only debt he truly owed was the one he had finally paid to himself. He walked inside, closed the door, and began the rest of his life.